Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe P. Zapia, and it's playoff time, baby. You did it. You're here. You're with us. So let's go. It's waiver wire week 15. So if we're still picking up players, that means we're relevant, and that is a good thing. And of course, Derek Brown, my co-host, D-Bro, the king of bros, always relevant. He is the fantasy bro, after all. And Andrew Seifter is going to join us again. Andrew obviously does a lot of great work here at Fantasy Pros. We all know that. You should always be following him on the Twitter machine as well, over at Andrew_Seifter. Also contributes to the Black Book, does a lot of great things. Andrew, it's great to have you back. I love when three bald guys are on the show. To me, that's when the show's at its zenith. That's the peak of the program. So let's just jump right into things because there's a lot to get to. Tons of quarterback injuries, tons of things happening. We've got a lot of moving parts in the playoffs. It's starting to feel a lot like last year where the rails kind of, well, they say the train gets derailed. This is more like the rails get picked up, moved somewhere else, and the train goes smashing off into a cliff or something like that. But we're going to figure it out. Don't worry. We're here. We're always here. We're not going to let you fall. We're going to pick you up and carry you to a championship. So let's kick things off here with the number one guy on the board for us, the consensus sleeper waiver wire pickup for me is Elijah Moore, wide receiver of the New York Jets, coming off a game yesterday with 6 for 60. That's what we want. D-Bro sang his praises last week. He is rostered in just 31% of sleeper leagues still. That seems odd to me, but with Corey Davis dealing with the concussion, most likely out for this week, one would imagine in a game against the Detroit Lions, you're either going to get Mike White in a flak jacket, or you're going to get Joe Flacco in a regular jacket. I don't know which one. We'll find out sooner or later. But either way, it's a good opportunity for Elijah Moore to eat some more and to be fantasy relevant if you're looking to cover some of these guys. We had a T. Higgins injury. We've had injuries all over the place. So we're looking to fill some roles here at flex, at wide receiver 3. Elijah Moore might be a guy to do that. So let's talk about him because he is also on the list. We're going to put him to the side for a moment. Instead, we want to talk to you guys about the running back. So, Andrew, you are our guest. Let's kick things off here with the top running back on your list here for Week 15. Who is it?
All right. Well, you know, the fantasy mantra is always don't chase last week's stats, right? So I'm going to do the exact opposite of chasing last week's stats, and I'm going to lead this show off with a guy who scored negative fantasy points last week. That's Alexander Mattison of the Vikings. Let's be real here. It's Week 15. The people watching this are in the playoffs. You probably have a pretty good team. You're probably not looking for a plug and play. You're probably trying to figure out how do I maximize the value of my bench players? And that means you want to find a guy who has a path theoretically to being an upgrade over one of your starters. Now we'll get to, maybe you're a Dameon Pierce owner or something and you need help. We'll get to those guys in a minute. There are some options, but I think if you need a guy who could be a league winner, Alexander Mattison is always that guy. If Dalvin Cook, he's been healthy this year, but he's missed time every other season of his career. If Dalvin Cook gets hurt next week, the Vikings have one of the very best schedules remaining for running backs. And I can tell you, in the past, anytime that Dalvin Cook has been out, I've ranked Alexander Mattison exactly where I would have ranked Dalvin Cook, in the exact same spot. Mm-hmm. So we're talking a guy who could be a top 10 running back in a plum matchup. He could be a top 5, top 3 running back. So if you don't need a plug and play starter for next week, just stash a guy like Alexander Mattison.
And it's weird, Andrew, because you'd think it'd be higher than 42%, because usually that's the guy that people the last couple of years have been going after late in those playoff runs, trying to be ahead. But for some reason, maybe it's because of all the RB attrition, we haven't had that opportunity. People have been looking for guys who could plug and actually play in any given week, especially last week. You were missing Ken Walker, all the guys on bye. So it was a tough set of circumstances. And at this point, look, as far as spend goes, you all know what you have to do. Get the guys you need to win and cover yourself for insurance. Mattison, definitely a great one, top of the board there. How about you, Derek Brown? Who are you chasing at RB in Week 15?
So I wrestle between two different players for this top spot. The one guy that I'm going to go with first, I think has at least standalone value that we could look to for the rest of the season over, a guy that we're really just looking at for Week 15. But the first guy on the list is Chuba Hubbard. He's only rostered in 40% of sleeper leagues. I don't think it's going to take much to get him on your team, at least at this point. If he's out there, nobody cares about him. So about 3% of your fab, maybe you got to go to 5, but he does have a standalone role in this backfield. Yes, Deontay Foreman is still the leader of this committee, but Chuba Hubbard was good last week. 17 touches, 99 total yards. If he got into the end zone, he's going to be a top 24 running back with those types of numbers. And versus Foreman, he had 23 snaps versus Foreman's 34. He almost ran the same amount of routes. If anything were to happen, like Andrew's talking about, if anything happens to Dalvin Cook, anything happens to Deontay Foreman, I think Chuba Hubbard is going to take over that committee lead role. And again, we're talking about a guy who's, the matchups aren't fantastic, but they aren't terrible either. Like Pittsburgh, Detroit, Tampa Bay. 2 of those 3 are, it's not great. Detroit's been better, but you can still run on them. So I think Hubbard is a good mix of not only contingency and injury possibilities upside, but also some standalone flex value too.
He is rostered in 40% of sleeper leagues right now, Chuba Hubbard. So again, with spend this week, we're not even going to talk about this. I know people can say, well, how much would I look? What do you have left? What do you need? Just do it. This is one and done here in the playoffs. Now, if you're in a bye, it's a little different situation. If you want to be a little bit more, I would say, cautious with some of the spend because you don't know week to week what's going to happen, that's fair. But if you're in it right now, you do what you have to do to survive in advance. That's what we want to do. Let's go back to you, Andrew. You have Chuba Hubbard as your number 2 as well. Again, the roster percentage in the low 40s there for him on Sleeper. So he's still very much available. Why do you want to add him this week?
Yeah, so, I think it's interesting on that fab question because I would rather have Alexander Mattison in a vacuum. But if I am that Damian Pierce manager where I need a plug and play and Chuba Hubbard's coming off a good game. So you're going to probably have to bid a little bit more to get Chuba Hubbard than you are Alexander Mattison, where people are just not thinking about him, So even though I have Mattison ranked higher in my rankings, I would, if I needed Chuba Hubbard, I'd be willing to bid more for him than for Mattison. So, I think those matchups against Pittsburgh and Detroit are both matchups that you can feel pretty good about, mostly because ever since Sam Darnold's come back in, this looks like an actual offense again. When Baker Mayfield was the quarterback, I didn't want any part of this offense. It was just really ugly. Now they can at least stay in games, which means they can run the ball. And like Debro said, Foreman is still the lead back, but this is a committee. They're both going to play. Hubbard's going to be in that 40 to 50% of the snap range. He can catch passes. He can run between the tackles. And this is a team that's actually been running the ball pretty well. I mean, Foreman has 400-yard games in the last 7 weeks, and I think Hubbard has been running effectively. He's got 31 carries over his last 2 games. That's a lot of touches. So, I think he's with game flow probably against Pittsburgh and Detroit, they'll be in those games. He can establish the run. He's that handcuff in case Foreman gets hurt as well.
Right.
So I like guys like that have some plug and play value and also some handcuff value.
Yeah, plug and play with the upside is huge right now when you hit to the playoffs because that's what we're looking for. If you advance and all of a sudden that guy becomes the number 1 RB the following week, if something happens to Foreman, it's a huge difference. Let's get to the next guy on your list, Debro. Who is it at running back for week 15?
Well, outside of the Adam Schefter news, which we all kind of read that pre-kickoff and we're like, oh, okay, cool. So Travis Homer's not the starter, except he was. So we got Travis Homer. I'm bringing him up here, Joe, because he doesn't make the number 1, and I kind of bounced between, and it really comes down to what do you need for your team. If you need a plug and play guy this week, then you can look to Homer as long as Kenneth Walker and DJ Dallas are out, and they're on a short week. Neither one of those guys practiced at all last week, so I'm treating this like they're both going to be out again in week 15. And Travis Homer played all the snaps. And I'm like, I get that his stat line at the end of the day wasn't fantastic. 11 touches, only 34 total yards. But you're telling me you can get a waiver wire guy, a running back, and we care about volume. Played 91% of the snaps and ran a route on 75% of the dropbacks. I understand that San Francisco is a terrible matchup for him.
Yeah.
But he's going to own all of the passing downs. Geno has been checking down, not a ton, but it is in his skill set to catch passes. I mean, come on, guys. Like, he's going to be, at least just based off of the volume of snaps, low-end RB2, high-end RB3 if Walker and DJ Dallas are out. For that, yeah, I mean, he's got to make the list and got to fall within my top 2 for the week.
No, it certainly makes sense. 47% rostered on Sleeper. That went up, obviously, considerably over the last few days as we were trying to figure out who it would be in the Seattle backfield, and there we have it. So Travis Homer has some flex appeal, I think we could all agree, this week, depending on what's going on, regardless of how bad the matchup may or may not be. Andrew, let's jump to your number 3 at the RB position. Who is it for week 15 that we want to add?
Yeah, so I definitely considered making Travis Homer my pick here as well. My one concern is that game got so out of hand so early that they went away from running the ball a lot, and I do think they kind of recognize Tony Jones is not a guy that can be in on passing down, so that might have played somewhat to that skewed snap share. But yeah, like Debro said, short week. There's a good chance that Homer will be that lead back again. But I think if I had to go with someone as a plug and play, I would lean towards Tyler Allgeier coming off the bye. So his roster rate's a little bit lower than it would be otherwise. Atlanta, we know they're one of the most run heavy teams in the entire league. And I think they might become even more run heavy with Desmond Ridder under center, rookie quarterback making his first start. So I think they're going to run the ball first down, second down, third down until the cows come home and hope they can stick in games. Allgeier has actually led this backfield over Cordero Patterson in snaps in 3 of the last 4 games. So he's technically their lead back right now. I'll acknowledge he's better in non-PPR because he doesn't really have a pass catching role, but he's got double-digit carries in 8 of his last 10 games. He's got at least 45 rushing yards in 8 of his last 10 games. His upcoming schedule is not great, but it's not terrible. I mean, matchups with New Orleans and Arizona are matchups you can run the ball a little bit against those teams. So I feel like he's kind of your quintessential RB3. Maybe in a non-PPR, you can even look at him as a low-end RB2. And at this time of year, if you're scrambling, like I mentioned, Dameon Pierce, if you're scrambling for an option, he's probably a better option than you're going to find on that Houston roster.
That's fair. Debro, close us out. Who is the last guy on your list for RB in Week 15?
I've discussed my concerns about him ad nauseum over the last few weeks, both with efficiency and now dealing with a neck injury. If Saquon Barkley misses any time, this is the ad to sit here and be ahead of the curve with. So I'm bringing up Matt Breida. He's only 1% or 19% rostered on Sleeper right now. I think you're looking at a 1 to 2% bid, like legit. You could probably get him after waivers run, to be honest, because people are okay. They're like, okay, is it him? Is it Brightwell? Even if you have Saquon, people are like, I don't know who to pick up. I lean towards Breida because he saw the only running back goal line touch outside of Saquon's work. He out-snapped Brightwell on third downs 6-3, and he owned all of the 2-minute offense. So if you're looking at, okay, who's going to play passing downs? Who is going to own the higher value touches in this backfield if Saquon were to miss? I think that's Breida. His upcoming schedule is not fantastic. We talked about how bad or how good the Commanders' run defense is. You don't want to run on them. He gets the Commanders, gets Minnesota, gets Indy. Those last 2 teams are, again, not great matchups. Indy's probably the best out of the 3. But if Saquon misses any kind of time, I think Matt Breida is the player that you need to be going after.
Yeah, and don't forget, everybody. I know look, you're busy. It's the holidays. We're trying to make these waiver claims. You got multiple leagues on multiple sites. Use the tools, please, everybody. Help us help you over at My Playbook, fantasypros.com/myplaybook. We've got the free agent finder. It's free to use. Okay, we talk about the premium tools, but that's free. The top available tool, that is free too, to find the unrostered players that you should be having on your leagues. The free agent finder is going to go through and find the quick free agents that you need to add to your team as well. So those 2 tools are free. So you can sync your league, download the app, My Playbook. It's over in all the stores there. Top available, free agent finder. Both of those are free tools to help you get to that championship. So again, this is the point where maybe things went well for you. Don't quit. Don't stop working. Keep pushing. Anybody else, Debro, worth adding on the RB position to? Because I see Zonovan Knight is still just 57% rostered. And I don't know what the hell we've been doing the last 3 weeks.
I don't get it. Like we keep bringing him up. We brought him up last week. He's 54%. Now he's 57%. People are still like, oh, well, it's Michael Carter could, factor into the work. Dude, Zonovan Knight is the lead back there. He is. He got all the carries. He's still running routes. We know the team wants to run the ball. Pick him up. He should be rostered in the 70 to 75% range, like at minimum, considering the work that he's getting. So yeah, we got to bring him up. Some other handcuffed guys. I know Andrew added a few names here, so I'm going to lean some of these to him, but everybody knows my love for Jaylen Warren. That love knows no bounds. So if Najee misses any time, I think that he would be the clear-cut guy. He has been the clear backup the entire time. So again, we're looking at players, and we keep preaching this, but we see injuries pile up week after week. How many weeks have we seen stuff like this happen, guys? Like, okay, we were trying to be ahead of if anything happened to ETN. Okay, we're trying to be ahead of if anything happens to Walker or these other players. Right. Picking up these guys like, and I talked about Matt Breida, picking up players at this time of the year when running backs, the volume is adding up. Those injuries can add up. These are the guys that like week 15, week 16, you're like, I can't believe I'm going to win a fantasy championship or move on in the playoffs because I'm playing that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. But this is where we're at.
And Andrew, Khalil, Herbert, Benjamin, some guys maybe people have forgotten about that could have been dropped if people were crushed for IR spots, as obviously the last few weeks is very likely. Those guys might be floating around some waiver wires as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a common theme on this show for me anyway. Like, unless you absolutely, have to find a plug and play for next week, I think the best way to approach the waiver wire is just to get the guys that people are forgetting about. Get the guys who are coming off a bye. Get the guys who are on IR and maybe due back soon. Get the guys who are the clear handcuff to a starter that's healthy right now, but might not be healthy next week. I think that's the way I want to fill all my bench spots as I move into the playoffs. A lot of teams have a bye this week. You don't need a plug and play. You want to look to week 16, week 17. Who could be those difference makers? Well, Khalil Herbert could be a difference maker. He's eligible to return off of IR in week 16. And so you got to be a little ahead of the curve. Get him a week early rather than a week late, right? The Bears, like I said with the Falcons, this is one of the most run-heavy teams in the entire league. And Khalil Herbert has looked really good at times this year. He's looked like he was going to overtake David Montgomery at times just based on his performance. And he still could do that down the stretch. But even if they share the role, I mean, Khalil Herbert already has 6 games this season where he's been a top 25 fantasy running back in half PPR leagues. His upcoming schedule is really not that bad, other than he gets the Bills in week 16, but he's got Detroit after that. So, I think you look at this, it's just a guy who's a good player on a team that wants to run the ball as much as they possibly can. Justin Fields is getting healthier, and that's going to open up more running lanes, I think, for the running backs as well, when he's got that threat of the designed runs back in play. So I feel like he's a guy that could be a solid RB2 that people have just completely forgotten about because he's sitting there on IR.
Add talent, add opportunity, add options. That's what you want to do right now at the RB position, especially. Let's switch gears to the wide receiver position. And Derek Brown, your top guy this week, is also Elijah Moore. So let's go. Let's talk more. Let's get your take about Mr. Moore and how he can help people in week 15.
We talked about him on the Start Sit show, Joe. We talked about him as a flex appeal guy. And this was, again, staying ahead of the curve. He's only rostered in 31% of sleeper leagues. I think a 3% bid, 4%, 5%, something low of that nature is going to get you Elijah Moore. And yes, led the team in targets last week with 21% target share. Corey Davis is dealing with a concussion, so probably not going to see him this week. And we need to bring this up because the next 3 matchups for Elijah Moore are fantastic for slot wide receivers. He gets Detroit, Jacksonville, and Seattle. Since week 8, Detroit has given up the most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wideouts. Jacksonville, over that span, 3rd most. And Seattle, we've talked about this all season. You stay away from the outside corners. Yes, Michael Jackson is struggling a little bit, but Kobe Bryant is still the cornerback to target on that secondary. So Elijah Moore, he's going to be a strong flex play. If he gets in the end zone with last week's stat line, he would have been a top 24 wide receiver this week.
Yeah, and obviously the in and out of quarterback, too. That certainly screwed up the rhythm for any Jets offense that they were trying to get going there. Credit to Mike White, too. What a gutsy performance. Magic Mike, let's give some credit here. I can't believe it. It's week 15. I'm giving credit to Jets quarterbacks. What's the world become? Andrew, I know Eli Moore was on your list as well. He was your number 2 guy. So any final thoughts on him before we close the book and go to your number 1?
Yeah, I really love Elijah Moore as a pickup as well. I mean, he got 10 targets, so the fantasy numbers were not huge, but the sharp fantasy managers will see the target count and know that's a sign of things to come. I think one real key in this situation is that he actually played ahead of Denzel Mims after Corey Davis left the game, which means that he was in on 2 wide sets as well. Because I agree with what Derek said in terms of slot. He's a great player out of the slot, but it's even better if you can see him also being in those 2 wide sets outside. And because that would push his snap share up from around 50% into that like 70-80% range. It's going to lead to 2 or 3 extra targets a week. So with Corey Davis out, I think, and that favorable schedule that Derek mentioned, I think he's a really strong option with this Jets offense that just looks a lot better. I know they didn't put up huge numbers against Buffalo. A few teams do, but with that plum schedule and Mike White hurling the ball all over the field with broken ribs or whatever he may have,
Warrior Mike
exactly.
White.
Moxie. You gotta invest in that moxie.
Coming out of the tunnel there after going back in, just limping back onto the field, must throw one more pass to Garrett Wilson. It's amazing. Let's get to your number one guy. So enough Elijah Moore talk. Let's move on to your number one guy you want to add this week, Andrew, at wide receiver, week 15. Who is it?
All right. Well, I'm going to go back to the well on players that people might have forgotten about, and that's Mecole Hardman, who could be back this week 15, from that abdomen injury that put him on IR. And before that injury, he was really starting to put up some big numbers in this Kansas City offense. I believe he had 2 weeks as like a top 27 receiver, and then 2 weeks as a top 10 receiver the final 2 games before he went down. While he was out, you may have noticed Kadarius Toney had an injury of his own again, so he didn't take over that job. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he's been inconsistent like he's been his entire career, so he's not really demanding those targets. Sky Moore, he could be on the Mecole Hardman career trajectory, which means maybe we're looking at him in 2 or 3 years as a guy that we can play. But right now, Mecole Hardman is that guy. He's that guy that Andy Reid loves to scheme up for design touches, whether they're end arounds, looking for him down the field, looking for him over the middle of the field. They're using him in a variety of ways. There's room for another offensive option in this on this team beyond Travis Kelce and Juju Smith-Schuster. And I think Mecole Hardman is the best candidate to do that. You look at the schedule, it's not great at Houston, Seattle, Denver, but this is Patrick Mahomes' offense. So do we really care about the schedule with this team? I don't.
Well, Patrick Mahomes in a dome last time I checked was pretty good. So that's what we're getting next week. So if ever there was a week to get excited about everything that could be Kansas City Chief related, I think it's this week, isn't it?
Exactly. But I'll get excited about the Chiefs each and every week, Joe.
Yeah, that is very fair. All right, D-Bro, let's get to the number 2 guy on your list. Who is it for wide receiver this week?
We have talked about Parris Campbell on so many shows. People know
so many shows.
I mean, I don't get it. Like, I know that the Colts passing attack is not fantastic. I know that Matt Ryan does not play to his ceiling and he wants to check it down. Again, that is why you love Parris Campbell. He is only 42% rostered on Sleeper, 2-3% bid. I mean, really, it's not much it's going to take to get him. The next few matchups, and really, we're playing week to week, guys. They get the Minnesota Vikings this week. We've talked about everybody. You just start people versus the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah.
Chandon Sullivan in the slot can't cover anybody. Since week 6 with Matt Ryan under center, 20% target share, 1.5 yards per route run. He has had 3 wide receiver 1 weeks over that span. Also a wide receiver 3 finish in there. So we're talking about a guy that wide receiver 3 with more upside to be had. And since week 8, Minnesota 27th in fantasy points per game allowed to slot wide receivers. So you're looking for a guy that's plug and play with a ceiling to boot. Yeah, it's Parris Campbell.
All right, Andrew, over to you. Parris Campbell, by the way, 42% roster. That's absurd to me. I can't believe we're still there. Let's go to your number 3. And it's a guy in Washington. I think this is a great one. I think is the perfect people forgot about. And then the injuries and then all this stuff and then buys and all these weird confluence of events. But here we are. And Jahan Dotson still floating around in more than 60% of leagues right now.
Yeah, I think he's a great pickup. I mean, it's so funny because people tend to get so hyped up for these rookies, but when the rookie takes this kind of like indirect path like Dotson has this year, I mean, remember, he came out at the beginning of the season and he scored 4 touchdowns in their first 4 games. And everyone was like, man, this guy is going to be the breakout receiver of the year. And then he went down with injury, was out for almost 2 months, and then comes back and gets really slowly worked back in. But then suddenly last week, or the week before the bye, I should say, he comes in and he plays 79% of the snaps, which is more than Curtis Samuel did. And you look at Curtis Samuel, he's a good player, but he's not really a guy that should be on the field every single play. He's more of a gimmick player. He's the guy that should be that third receiver. Dotson is the guy that's got that first round pedigree. He's the guy that should be an every down player for this offense. And he got 9 targets in that last game before the bye. Like I said, we've seen the upside with him in terms of the red zone ability, the big play ability. Washington's just with Taylor Heineke, they're just one of these teams that can get into these fun kind of back and forth games a little bit. And I think that we could see Jahan Dotson pop up for some big games before the end of the year.
Yeah, and everybody forgets too, was Carson Wentz playing quarterback back in those early games where he was good. So it takes a little time to build the rapport with another quarterback in Taylor Heineke. It's still stunning to me that we have set a record for quarterbacks starting in the NFL, and we're only week 15. We got a couple more weeks to go. We could shatter this bad boy. It's so bizarre to me in a league where we're searching for quarterback over and over and over again, and people feel like they got their franchise guy, and yet this is a year where we played the most guys have started. Between injuries and performance.
I guess all those phantom roughing the passer penalties are not working. It's the quarterbacks are still getting hurt.
They're getting shellacked yesterday. There was blue. It was like a permanent blue 10. They didn't even take the thing down anymore. They pop up. They were just like, let's just leave it up. Just going to leave it up. Somebody's coming in this bad boy at some point. Next guy on your list, Debro, is who at wide receiver, number 3?
It's week 15 in the year 2022, and Tutu Atwell is not a name that was going to be on my bingo card at all. No,
well, look,
it was
here
not.
We are. 2022 has gotten weird. Let's be honest.
It's gotten weird, and one of the weirdest things, not to say that it's weird that he's only 2% rostered on Sleeper, but one, me bringing up his name, and two, actually a lot of praise to be had for Tutu Atwell. You look at last week, 63% route participation. He led the team with a 25% target share, 1.9 yards per route run. And Tutu Atwell, the thing, and I talk about this constantly, Joe, is that when Sean McVay talks about getting somebody more involved, it always happens. And I don't believe a lot of coaching narratives or coach speak and all those types of things. But when Sean McVay says stuff like this, you need to take it to the bank. He talked about last week about getting Tutu Atwell more involved. Look, it's my bad. And yeah, you look back and you're like, Allen Robinson was running routes. We got Skoranek running routes. Why is Tutu Atwell not playing more? Because every time they give him the ball, he's making big plays happen.
Sure.
So Sean McVay last week was like,
we all knew that. It was the Kenny hold up. It was, some of the other intangibles. Well, speed is not in doubt. That was never the problem with Tutu.
And the playmaking ability is real. If you look at Tutu Atwell amongst all wide receivers with 20 or more targets this year, 8th in PFF receiving grade, 3rd in yards per route run. This is a player that we could see grab a huge role in this Rams offense, especially as much 11 personnel as they have run and are going to run with Baker under center. I know the matchups are not fantastic, but Green Bay, Denver, and the Chargers. But again, we're talking about easy looks for Tutu Atwell, who I was surprised, guys. Last week, it's not just how good he looked out of the slot after the catch. His route running was good. Even when they put him on the perimeter, he was getting separation versus zone coverage. I think that he has got a big chance to grab a large portion of this passing offense and establish himself as a possible full-time starter walking into next season.
Just 2% rostered. That's unbelievable. So Tutu is 2. There you go. It's a fun name to say, too, Tutu Atwell. I just like saying it. Let's say another name here. Same team, Andrew. You've got another guy you want to add from the Los Angeles Rams. Can you believe it? Not one, but 2 guys we want to add from the wide receiving core of the Los Angeles Rams. Hot dog. Let's go.
Yeah, this is very weird. I think I just threw up in my mouth a little bit even thinking about that.
Possible.
But I am not a Baker Mayfield fan, but I think it's hard to argue with the fact that he brings a little more juice and life to this offense than John Wolford or Bryce Perkins do. So on that measure alone, I think you can kind of pick your flavor of Rams wide receiver. There's probably some Ben Skowronek truthers out there in full PPR. Maybe you make a case for him. And I know, Derek made a good case for Tutu Atwell, but I'm going to go with the guy that I think profiles as the number 1 receiver on this team, the guy that's got the all-around skill set. Some people are ageist I'm heightist, so that's why I'm going to go with Van Jefferson over Tutu Atwell. It was only one play at the very end of that game, but Baker Mayfield and Van Jefferson seemed to show some chemistry there, more chemistry than Baker Mayfield ever showed with DJ Moore in two and a half months throwing the football to him. So, I think Van Jefferson is a talented player. He brings a dynamic to this offense that these other receivers do not. I just think he profiles as sort of that typical X receiver. And we know Baker Mayfield's temperamental. He picks favorites. He likes some people. He really doesn't like other people. It seems like he might like Van Jefferson, and that's Narrative Street, but I live on Narrative Street on this one because it's the Rams, and I'm going for it. Van Jefferson.
Well, we added two Rams wide receivers, Van Jefferson, 40% rostered, Tutu Atwell, 2% rostered. D-Bro, how about we add a second Colts wide receiver? Because we love the prolific offenses that are the Rams and the Colts.
At this time of the year, look, it's all matchups. That's the things that matter. The matchups for this week. Talked about Parris Campbell going against the Vikings. Again, we're going to bring up another Colts guy because the Vikings can't stop anybody. We've seen this over multiple weeks. We've talked about this over multiple weeks. Alec Pierce, rostered in 26% of sleeper leagues. He plays the field stretching role for the Colts. You look at his production since week 11, 18% target share. He's running a route on 72% of dropbacks. The Vikings, second most fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers, most receiving yards per game. I mean, what else do we want? I mean, beautiful matchups in this time to sit here and get us to the next week of the playoffs. You might not believe in Matt Ryan, and that is fine. But how many lesser quarterbacks we've seen? And I don't want to shade the legend that is Mike White, but Mike White crushed the Vikings. Jared Goff just did that. Mac Jones had a good week against the Vikings too. And they were saying that Matt Ryan can't. Yeah, I'm going to bring up two Colts wide receivers because the matchup is fantastic for both of them to have good weeks.
DJ Chark had a good week too. He was my flex appeal guy on the Thursday show. And when DFS show, he was also the darling lineup builder in all of our DK lineups. And he performed yet again, 56% rostered only on Sleeper. Can we please add DJ Chark? I mean, what's going on? Jameson Williams caught a touchdown. Penny Sewell caught a pass. Everybody's catching balls from Jared Goff. Now, I will say this. Jared Goff is going to be outside this week. We know Jared Goff is more of an indoor cat, so that's something to keep in mind, be aware of. But still, very exciting stuff. Marquise, Goodwin, Chris Moore. Chris Moore had a huge game, too. Andrew, let's talk about Chris Moore also and what he might be able to deliver potentially down the stretch here as the Texans kind of bereft of options, but might as well get some evaluations on some guys.
Yeah, I mean, I actually would prefer Marquise Goodwin just because, we talk about handcuffs for running backs. I feel like he's like a great handcuff for wide receivers because the Seahawks just funnel all of their targets to their top two guys. The reason I like Marquise Goodwin is not because he had a big week last week. It's because that's so rare. It's so rare that the third receiver on this offense has a big week. And that's why if either of the top two guys go down, I think he's a plug and play wide receiver too. He's got the ability in this offense. He's shown it in this last game to make plays with Geno Smith. So I think if you had an injury to either Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, he would be a plug and play. So I like him for that reason. Chris Moore, I felt like he needed to be discussed because he put up those big numbers, but I'm not really buying it. I don't want to invest in the Texans offense. If you are going to invest in it, you probably should look at Nico Collins first because he's the more talented player. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Michigan guy, but I think that there's just if they're going to be in evaluation mode, Nico's the one probably they should evaluate, but he has to get healthy and get on the field first. So if Nico Collins and Brandon Cooks remain out, then I do think Chris Moore is that plug and play flex consideration.
In some deeper leagues, I already picked him up because I just thought Chris Moore was one of these guys you just want to speculate on. In Dynasty, too, he was available floating on the waiver wire earlier. I was like, I'm going to pick this guy up, see what he does the rest of the season. By the way, Tyler Lockett, how good has that guy been? 6 straight weeks with a touchdown. So unbelievable. So good. He is wide receiver 8 in half PPR right now. What a value Tyler Lockett's been. I wish I had any shares. I had 0 because going into the year, I was looking at Drew Lock and Geno Smith. And I thought, well, this is something to run far, far away from. Who'd have thought Geno Smith would be this good and Tyler Lockett would be good with him. Let's get to the QBs here. D-Bro, since we've added all the wide receivers, of the Indianapolis Colts. We might as well add the quarterback too. What do you think?
I mean, it's just start every quarterback versus the Vikings. We've been here. We continue to be here, but
it hasn't failed.
No, it hasn't failed. It hasn't failed, and we know what the Colts are still throwing the ball at a decent clip. Even though Jeff Saturday, let's run. We've seen over multiple weeks, Matt Ryan is still getting plenty of passing attempts. The Vikings don't have really a great pass rush to speak of. Their secondary has been terrible. And versus quarterbacks, 6th most fantasy points per game. They're allowing the most passing yards per game and the highest yards per attempt. All this means is if you have substandard quarterback, but you put them against the Vikings, they're going to look beautiful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Matt Ryan, 17% rostered. You can add him and all the Colts wide receivers you can handle. You might get a group package. Perhaps you can get all three.
You get a group deal.
Like $1 a piece, or like 3 for $5. Like
is
a 3 for $5
still
deal.
A thing? Is that still around? Is Groupon still around?
That's a funny thing. I guess it is.
Go check that.
Groupon was a thing like 10 years ago. That was like a thing. It's like anyone who did anything had to do it on Groupon. But now I haven't heard anyone say Groupon.
I don't know if it's. I got to go Google this.
Well,
now.
You know what? Nobody goes anywhere anyway. After COVID, 2 years, nobody went anywhere. So I think that probably killed the Groupons there. Let's get to your guy here. Andrew, who's the QB we're streaming in week 15 for you?
Well, we've been throwing love at this guy all show, so let's keep the theme going. It's Mike White. We have to make sure he plays, of course, because he took not one but 2 massive hits in that game against the Bills, and he came back both times. So the fact that he was able to gut it out and come back into that game is a sign to me that unless he's got he's getting tested for internal organ injuries. So if something like that pops up on a test result, he's not going to play. But if it's a broken rib, this guy's going to play with a broken rib because that's just who he is. He's fighting really hard to get this starting job next season. It's not going to be Zach Wilson. Is it going to be Jimmy Garoppolo or someone like that? Or is it going to be Mike White?
So.
I think Mike White's making his case.
I think Mike White's making a great case. And all the x-rays are all going to come back and they're all going to have that dog in him.
Yeah,
exactly. You're going to get all over Twitter.
That's exactly right.
That's going to be the x-rays of Mike White. And you know what? This is the first one. This is the first one all season where I support that stupid meme. Stupid meme. It's
I just wish it'd go away.
We needed to reserve it for Mike White. That's the guy that got the. Did you see him screaming in agony after that? And look, that was a massive hit he took. Let's be honest. That dude came back onto the field. I was stunned, man. Absolutely stunned. It was like
his screaming in agony was justified. Now, if you go back to the videos of Mac Jones screaming in agony from his ankle, but yes, props to Mike White.
I just want to say this is another one of those games where you look at the stat line and you're like, oh, he had a bad game. If you watch that game, he played really well in that game.
Mm-hmm.
He made a lot of really tough throws against a really tough defense in bad weather conditions, and it gets a lot easier this week. He gets the Lions at home. So he was a top 7 fantasy QB in each of the 2 games prior to this last one. He's been putting up 250, 300 yards each and every week since he took over this job. So as long as he plays, Jets are in the playoff hunt. They're going to get him on the field if they possibly can. He's going to want to be on the field if he possibly can. And if he is, I want to start him.
Okay, let's get to the tight end position. D-Bro, who do you want to stream at tight end? Who you want to add to the roster in week 15?
I mean, we've talked about a lot of Colts players. We talked about a lot of Jets players. I'm going to stay on the Jets train right now. Tyler Conklin. He's only rostered in 27% of sleeper leagues. And any tight end that we bring up on this show at this point of the season, you can poke holes in every single one of the resumes. You could sit there and say, well, yes, but for the majority of the year, he's been pretty terrible. Well, okay, that's pretty much every tight end. And especially if you're going to streaming options and you have all year, that's every single tight end you could say about every one of them. So Tyler Conklin, I get it. I hear you. And I looked at the stat lines too, but the matchups are what matters. If you're streaming, we want good matchups for these guys. So yes, he's a matchup-based streamer, but Detroit has not been able to cover tight ends the entire season. 5th most fantasy points per game allowed to the position, 5th highest catch rate. All right, Andrew, take us through your tight end to add this week off the waiver wire for week 15, round 1 of the playoffs.
All right. Well, I love this guy, Chig Okonkwo. You guys may have talked about him last week on the show, but his roster rate's still pretty low. And, he's splitting snaps with Austin Hooper. This is what the Titans do, but it doesn't matter with a guy like Okonkwo because there's just painfully few difference makers at the tight end position, and he's one of them. He's a playmaker. He can make big plays down the field. He was showing this When he was playing like 10 or 20% of the snaps earlier in the season, he seemed to come down with a 30-yard catch every week. And now he's playing more. He's got at least 5 targets in 3 straight games. He's a red zone threat. His speed score was in the 95th percentile. If he was getting it done on that really limited volume, just imagine what he can do now. I mean, we're just seeing it. He's a weapon in this offense, and especially with Treylon Burks out, like they needed him, and he rose to the task. So it's tight end, to find a player like he's like David Njoku, basically. Like there's just not many tight ends that have that kind of physical freak nature skill set, and he's got it.
He does. He absolutely does. He's a matchup problem. There's no doubt about that. It's amazing too. I picked up Evan Ingram off a waiver wire yesterday. 30 points. I mean, it's just crazy. What is he now? Is he tight end 2 on the year?
4, I think.
After yesterday,
yeah.
4. Is
Wow. Yeah.
It's absurd.
Takes
It's
one
absurd.
massive game and guys go from 15 to 3.
And everyone knows what
15
Evan
to 5.
Ingram is. Like the man didn't suddenly change.
I'm not chasing next week. Let's just put it through that. Although I do think they have a real shot to beat the Cowboys. It really does. It's a perfect trap game for the Cowboys right now. You look back at that, especially because Trevor Lawrence is playing well. Go check out the BP show. We just talked about it. It's over there on the Betting Pros. If you haven't already checked that out, go look. We got the YouTube channel too. Go check that out. We did a look ahead show every single Monday. Me, Friedman, and Fitz. It's fun. Let's get to the defenses of the week. D-Bro, where are you starting with the streaming defenses?
I'm going to go to the Arizona Cardinals. Only 15% rostered on Sleeper. They get the Denver Broncos. If it's not cringeworthy Russell Wilson under center, and I get that he played a good game, it's the only good game he's played all season.
I was going to say, that's the best game he's played all year, and unfortunately it ended in a very sour note, which absolutely sucks. But, I mean, I'd be very surprised if he played this week.
Well, if you get Brett Ripien under center, then, hey, wheels up, baby. And we talk about this every single week. We've discussed when we brought up the Commanders in previous weeks. I want defenses that get after the quarterback. You have the Arizona Cardinals, who are 5th in pressure rate. So while their secondary has not been great, the Broncos don't have a lot of healthy wide receivers right now that can even get open. So if we're talking about lesser quarterbacks under center, the ability to pressure, we get some turnovers. It's why you play in stream defenses.
Yeah, only rostered in 15% of sleeper leagues, Arizona Cardinals D. Andrew, what's a D you're looking at this week for week 15?
I'm looking at the Carolina Panthers. I think they're a defense that's been a little bit underrated in general this season, but they've been playing particularly well lately. They did give up 24 points to Seattle, but that's not that much to give up to Seattle, and that was the most they've given up in over a month. And they get Pittsburgh at home this week, and that would be a good matchup if you were facing Kenny Pickett. If you're facing Mitch Trubisky, it's a phenomenal matchup. I mean, that guy is just a walking turnover machine.
Sure is.
They can get after the passer a bit too. They have a really strong secondary as well. So I don't really see Pittsburgh. They don't have a lot of dynamic playmakers to score a lot of points against that Carolina defense on the road. So I think the Panthers are a pretty strong streamer this week.
Low total in that game too. I think it's down to 38.5 this morning after the Mitchell Trubisky entry into the game. That certainly changed things. Okay, so those are the teams. Again, the Panthers 4% rostered. So talk about an easy pick up and stream if you don't like the defensive matches you have. I love where Andrew's head's at on that one. I love the Panthers this week at DFS too. I'm there. I'm in. Let's go to the top 5 players to add if you have the streaming waiver wires. It's the old school version. D-Bro, who are the top 5 for you this week?
Elijah Moore is number 1, Parris Campbell 2, Tutu Atwell 3, Pierce is number 4, and Tyler Conklin makes it a number 5. So just a quick takeaway with that, it kind of tells you where I'm at with running back pickups for the week. I think all these wide receivers I'll be picking up way before the running backs. Fair. All of these guys are flex worthy. Conklin makes the top 5 because you want matchup guys for tight ends. He easily could be a top 10 tight end this week considering the matchups, and with Corey Davis probably out of the lineup.
All right, Andrew, give us your top 5 ads for week 15 in the NFL.
Yeah, well, again, check your waiver wire because if DJ Chark or Zonovan Knight are there, those would be the top 2 guys. But if they're taken, then I would go with Mecole Hardman, number 1, Elijah Moore, number 2, Alexander Mattison, 3, Chig Okonkwo, 4. And then depending on whether you need a plug-in play or not, it'd be Tyler Allgeier or Khalil Herbert for that 5th spot for me.
All right, let's play a little game of keep or drop real quick. This is the nitty-gritty time, so we got to make some tough decisions here. Jakobi Meyers out this week. I don't know how excited we are about the Patriots passing game anyway going forward. So 80% rostered. Is that a guy we keep or drop over on Sleeper, Andrew? What do you think? If there's some of these guys like Elijah Moore, Parris Campbell, Mecole Hardman, would you drop Jakobi Meyers for them?
I would, yeah, especially if it's not full PPR. I mean, I think that's the best case that Myers has is in full PPR. But even then, not healthy, not a pleasing offense right now. It's just, do you want to invest in the Chiefs offense or do you want to invest in the Patriots offense? That's my question for you.
It's an easy answer. It's the Chiefs offense. Yeah. There you go. How about you, D, bro? You want to keep or drop Jakobi Meyers?
We're week to week now, guys. I mean, we have been all season. You can make that case, but right now, playoff time, it's win or go home every single week. So no, if there's a guy, unless you're in like the top 20 for wide receivers or running backs, and you're dealing with injuries, and I'm like, okay, you're going to come back and you're going to be a plug and play, like locked into my lineup stud. If you're hurt right now, there's most cases where I'm just dropping you back to the waiver wire. So drop Jakobi Meyers.
Right, Rondell Moore, keep or drop 60% roster. D-Bro, you're going to keep him or drop him, especially with Hollywood back?
Same idea. Drop him. Easily drop him.
Andrew, same thing? Easy drop for you?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see a path to enough targets for him to really matter now.
What about Gus Edwards with J.K. Dobbins back, looking better than J.K. Dobbins has looked all year? 55% roster, the running back of the Baltimore Ravens. What do you think, Andrew? Keep or drop Gus Edwards?
I think I would probably keep him just because when we're talking about guys like Chuba Hubbard and Tyler Allgeier, like these are guys that are in basically the same situation as Gus Edwards, run heavy teams where they're splitting the workload. I don't think J.K. Dobbins is going to be a every down back down the stretch. Like they want to keep this guy healthy if they possibly can. And that's going to, the Ravens haven't really been a team that wants to have a bell cow anyway. So I think that the hope, if you have Gus Edwards, is just that it's a pretty even two-man committee. You don't want to see Justice Hill stepping on the field. You don't want to see Kenyon Drake stepping on the field. If it's just Dobbins and Edwards, then I think Edwards still has a path to some RB3 value when they have plus mashups, and he's got that handcuff value behind a guy that's been hurt an awful lot.
D-Bro, same thing for you on Gus Edwards? Keep?
It depends on your roster makeup is what I'll say about Gus. If you need him, you're desperate for running back, and he is like your desperate dart throw RB2, then I say keep him. But if you're looking at him as a flex play, I would drop him in a heartbeat for any one of these top wide receivers we discussed, because I look at their flex appeal and I think they have a similar floor, but each one of these guys has a higher ceiling than Gus on a weekly basis right now.
All right, let's go to our Discord for the listener mailbag. Again, free to join, fantasypros.com/chat. But when you're a premium member, you get access to stages, AMAs, and a whole lot more. This one's from Johnny H. Jr. PPR League. I have Barkley and Rachaad White, looking like I'm going to need some backup plans. James Cook, Travis Homer, or Jerick McKinnon. Andrew, to your point, I think McKinnon's the guy I want to add, especially next week going against Houston there in the Dome. Mahomes, that's my favorite Mahomes. What do you think? Is McKinnon the guy, or Cook, or Homer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would probably be McKinnon. It's all season he's been this underrated lead back. He leads the Chiefs in snaps most weeks, and that's been true even when Clyde Edwards-Helaire was around. It's just this is a pass-first offense, and they're passing down back, and he can run the ball. The interesting thing is they line up in passing sets a lot inside the red zone, so that ends up meaning that Jerick McKinnon gets a fair number of snaps in the red zone too. It's not like they're just pounding it with Pacheco when they get down there. So he can make big plays in this offense. It's going to be a little bit up and down, boom or bust week to week with McKinnon, but that's true for most Chiefs players. And you live with the booms because they're really big.
D-Bro, you want to live with the booms with us?
I'm going to live in the volume country. I'm going to go Travis Homer here. I know that enough. The matchup is much better for McKinnon. This easily could be just a Mahomes air it out or a Pacheco game. So while we've seen the ceiling from Jerick McKinnon, I'm still going to side with the snaps and the volume, even in a bad matchup for Homer.
You can follow Andrew Seifter over on Twitter again at Andrew_Seifter. Check out all his great work over at Fantasy Pros as well. Andrew, thank you for your time and your insights. And D-Bro, thanks for always hanging out every Monday too. Congratulations to all of you who are still relevant in the playoffs. It's time to get those championships. The real work begins now. Thanks for hanging out with us. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Derek Brown and Andrew, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.